If you want to level up your product photography, you're going to want to avoid these 5 common mistakes that will ruin your photos. But the good news is, if you fix them, it will instantly make them better. So let's get into it. The first common mistake I see is photographers shooting in JPEG and not RAW. So JPEG is a compressed file, and by default your camera will already have this set on your camera. RAW files are a larger file size, therefore you have more detail in your photo. They are an unprocessed file. There's a lot more information there. Therefore, you can actually do a lot more manipulating in post-production. I highly recommend you just go change it over now. You are going to save yourself a lot of trouble later on. The second mistake that I see is photographers not prioritizing lighting. Now, lighting can be in a variety of forms. You can have natural light, constant lights, strobe lights, but if you really want to elevate your product photography, I highly recommend that you learn artificial lighting, in particular strobes. Now, strobes are really going to elevate your work and give you the flexibility over any of your scenes, and you won't be limited to the time of day, the weather, and you won't be limited in your creativity either. Now, while strobes can be a little bit more expensive, if you plan on taking this career to a commercial level, you'll want to make sure that you are delivering the highest quality results to your clients, and that means spending some money on your gear. Another thing that you want to keep in mind with lighting is your surroundings, your ambient light. So if you aren't using something like a strobe, be mindful of what is going on around you. As you can see by this video, we have a lot of ambient light going on, but we are also using some constant lights to light me up as well. I'm going to show you a few little examples of how ambient light, or even just lights in a house, can really ruin your photos. So when I was a food photographer way back in the day, I honestly only used natural light. I didn't understand strobe lighting. I didn't even understand artificial lighting. But the one thing that I prioritized when I was on location was for the venue to turn off the overhead lights, because there is nothing worse than a big overhead yellow light shining in on your scene and making the photo look a little bit gross. Another really good thing about using artificial light like strobes or constant lights is the fact that you can use modifiers. So you can shape the light, you can change the color, you can create different effects. You really don't have any limitations when you're utilizing something like a strobe. The third mistake that I see is lack of styling direction, and sometimes over cluttering our scene with unnecessary props, and it just gets a little bit confusing. So some people will look at a scene and go, oh, that looks so easy, but it actually takes a lot of effort and a lot of thought to put together a scene that looks really balanced and has a lot of harmony to it. Some people will just chuck in some random props and hope for the best, but that's not the case at all. You need to make sure your colors align, you need to make sure the heights align, you need to make sure it makes sense. Now, behind me, I don't have a great example because this is very simple, but there is a reason for that, because sometimes less is more. Now, I'm really going to expose myself here, and I'm going to show you some of my old photos when I had no idea about styling. These photos you'll see are overcluttered, they don't make sense, there's lots of random props, the colors don't make sense, and there's no real storyline. Or you can see that I'm trying to create a story, but it's just a bit too much. You don't want to overwhelm someone when they're looking at your photography. The main goal specifically for product photography is to showcase a product, therefore we don't want to overwhelm them with random props. We want to make sure the hero of the image is actually the product. Now, the fourth mistake that I see is the wrong color grade, and trust me, real guilty of this. I've done it, you've probably done it, and that's why you're sitting here watching this video. But how about you just come a little bit closer and I'm going to show you something. So here's a photo of a food flat lay that I took the other week, and I'm going to show you how the wrong color grade can make this photo look a little bit shit. But before we do that, let me show you how I would color grade this to enhance the photo. And that's the point of a color grade too. You want to enhance the photo and make it look better. You don't want to make it look worse. So what I'm doing here is downing my highlights, increasing my shadows, increasing my whites and blacks. I've developed this style over a few years, so this is definitely my personal preference. Okay, let me show you the before and after. So you can see I've just made it a little bit more colorful. I've made the colors of the food pop a little bit more. I've increased the brightness. So that's the before and after of that. Now, let me show you what I would call a bad color grade. So the first thing I notice is the white balance is off. So people might have a really overly yellow photo, or perhaps the tint's a little bit too green. The white balance just doesn't make sense for the shot. Maybe the highlights are blown out. The whites might be blown out. So as you can see, that does not look appetizing at all. The original looked a lot better. Okay, so let's scrap that because that just doesn't look pretty. Let's go back to my original color grade, and I want to show you how even going too far with a certain setting could ruin the photo as well. So this is pretty similar to what I originally had, but look at the saturation and how fake that looks. So that's just by adjusting one setting. Let's decrease that a little bit. Even just playing with the Kelvin and the tint can really impact the style of the photo too. So like to me, that looks a little bit too warm. So I'm gonna cool it down. So as you can see, that just really enhanced the photo. We don't want anything too warm or too cold. We don't want anything that looks too fake. We want it to enhance the food, make you wanna jump through the screen and eat it. Now the last mistake might seem a little bit obvious, but it is photos that are out of focus. So this means that if you don't actually capture it in focus in camera, it might be a little bit too blurry because you've used the wrong shutter speed. You may have even used the wrong aperture setting for the style of photo that you're trying to capture. And unfortunately, if you don't have your photo in focus, you cannot fix this in post-production. You're most likely gonna have to set back up and make sure you get it in focus again. So make sure your photos are in focus. So always use manual focus, and if you're using a really shallow depth of field, make sure the most important part of the product is sharp. So these are the 5 mistakes that I think can ruin your photos. So what did we learn? We need to make sure our photos are in focus. We need to have the correct color grade. We need to be mindful of our lighting. We need to be mindful of our styling, and we need to be shooting in RAW. I promise you, if you implement these, you'll be elevating your work in no time. I would never do this. This feels wrong. I always shoot in RAW, and I'm just gonna... Is that it?